Aquaman has done the impossible and made over $1 billion, making it the most successful DC film of all time, even surpassing the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, while also being the most successful movie to come out of the DCEU so far. I don't think anyone expected the savior to come in the form of a guy who talks to fish. But what does that mean in a broader context, though? Despite the film reversing the ailing fortunes of the DCEU, was it enough to course correct after the Justice League? Was I completely wrong in my most successful video where I talked about how Warner Brothers' attempt to have Zack Snyder imitate the Nolan Batman trilogy for the DCEU also killed it? Well, it has been saved, but it also hasn't. The answer to this question is a bit more nuanced than you'd think, so let's go down into the briny depths and see if we can figure out if Aquaman really did save the DCEU. But before we go into the briny depths, first let's take a quick journey to Westeros. During the month of April, I'll be kicking off a month of Ice and Fire, where I'll be producing video essays about Game of Thrones to celebrate the 8th and final season. But I need your help. As Lord of House Lobster, I'm calling upon you, my bannermen, to raise up your arms and join me as we lead the charge into the final battle against the Night King. Pledge your support through Bounty, a new crowdfunding platform that lets you choose what I'll be making next. I have 4 upcoming Game of Thrones video topics up there right now: What I Hate About Cersei, A Riddle of Power, Littlefinger and Varys, The Dark Knight and Joker of Westeros, and what went wrong with the last season of Game of Thrones. So pledge your loyalty towards the Kingdom of Bounty as it prepares its long campaign against the Empire of Patreon. Crowdfunding is only possible with you, the crowds. So have your maester call up your raven and go to bounty.com/lobstermagnet and place your king's ransom on what you want to see first. You gotta love to be God magnet. So let's talk a bit about Aquaman. I personally enjoyed it a lot, but I don't think I'd ever call it a great movie by any stretch of the imagination. It has a dumb, thudding script. No one in my theater laughed at any of the jokes. Jason Momoa attempts to grunt and glower his way with his limited range of emotion to distill something resembling charisma. Aquaman feels less like its own thing and more of a Frankenstein's monster composed of little bits and pieces from various Phase 1 Marvel movies. You got a bit of Thor with Atlantis being this fantasy wonderland like Thor's Asgard. You got a bit of Black Panther with an epic family struggle over who gets to have the right to claim the throne, and instead of multiple tribes based on different African cultures, you have different kingdoms of fish people who each have their own kind of Star Wars spaceship. They even take bits from the C-tier Marvel movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp, and literally ripping off the whole missing mother thing with Nicole Kidman, where we see that, spoiler alert, for the 5 people who haven't seen the movie, she's actually alive despite people having believed she was killed after being thrown in the trench. Hell, Black Manta even gets his own Iron Man-style building the suit montage. It's as if Warner Brothers cobbled together this script based on earlier drafts of things Marvel had in development. But it all worked in the end because James Wan directed the shit out of this movie and put in 120% effort into, let's be honest, not great material. But that's where the film really won me over. It was just trying so hard to entertain. It was like the ultimate film I always wanted when I was 5 years old. An underwater Star Wars with like 7 to 9 separate big expensive action sequences. A film that almost relies on video game logic where Aquaman fights against guys in Atlantean Master Chief armor, but he can't beat the guy in the red Master Chief armor because he has a higher rank, just like the elites in Halo. A film where every outfit worn by Amber Heard seems designed to create the maximum amount of puffy cleavage, including a Victorian gown made entirely out of jellyfish. A film whose climax sees Aquaman riding a giant Godzilla kaiju monster into what basically amounts to a Star Wars prequel-era underwater space battle. I cannot bring myself to hate any of these things, but that's the thing. Remember when this whole universe was designed to be a gritty, realistic take on superheroes? Remember how Man of Steel was supposed to be a realistic portrayal of what it would be like to have Superman in the real world, where even the military cuffs him and demands to interrogate him about being a literal illegal alien? Aquaman is practically a $200 million Saturday morning cartoon, which I'm fine with, but aesthetically this is so far removed from the original underpinnings that the DCEU was built upon that it's a complete tonal whiplash to go from this,
a being whose very existence challenges our own sense of priority in the universe. And you go back to Copernicus, where he restored the sun in the center of the known universe, displacing Earth, and you get to Darwinian evolution.
to this. And as much as people love to bitch about all the Marvel movies feeling samey, that tonal consistency has ultimately served as a way to boost the box office and an interest in movies that people didn't really care about. When your lowest batting average is Ant-Man with a $500 million total, as much as people try and bitch and whine about the Kevin Feige house style, the numbers say it's working. Versus the brotastic Zack Snyder style that the first few DC films were built on, and have been little by little moving away from. The best analogy I can think of to describe Aquaman's effect on the DCEU is, well, you remember in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, where Russia invades the USA and it's looking pretty bad, but then Captain Price launches a nuke and detonates it in space so that the EMP will knock out all the Russian electronics and allow the American military to survive and endure? Well, I'd say the state of the DCEU is kind of like that. Aquaman is the metaphorical EMP nuke that destroyed everything that came before. The self-serious, dark, deconstructivist take that had dominated the DCEU is gone, wiped away by a bright pastel bath of neon bioluminescent color. And as much as I love hating on Zack Snyder, in a sad sort of way it makes sense why Warner Brothers gave him so much control. After his success with 300, which single-handedly managed to turn March into a blockbuster movie season, it became readily apparent that this guy understood what fanboy culture wanted to see most. But sadly, that self-serious aesthetic could only go so far, and while Henry Cavill might still be Superman, Ben Affleck is out as Batman, and there seems to be no plans for a Justice League sequel where they go to fight the Legion of Doom or Darkseid. But James Wan took the $200 million from Warner Brothers, ran to the hills, and stuffed as much movie as he could possibly manage into Aquaman to turn it into a hit. He had Star Wars space battles, Indiana Jones-style deserts complete with temples, evil, scary fishmen, a Halo-esque power-armored battle sequence, plus the climax where the alliance of fish people battle the giant crab monsters before Aquaman comes on a giant kaiju monster and wrecks everyone's shit. What works most in the movie's favor is how the film isn't afraid to be true to its source material. It goes big and bold and doesn't apologize for itself, which felt like Batman v Superman was trying so hard to convince audiences that it was just something more than just your typical cape shit. That it was some portentous mediation on the nature of power and responsibility, when it really wasn't, especially at the end where three heroes team up to fight against the cave troll from Lord of the Rings. Oh, I mean Doomsday. While Aquaman isn't a continuity reboot, I do think it's a thematic reboot in terms of style and tone for the DCEU. These films are less concerned with creating a cinematic universe as much as they're concerned with basically aping the Phase 1 films from Marvel, but doing it on steroids.
Hey, you like Captain America and Thor? Well, we've got Wonder Woman, who's got the fantasy kingdom of Themyscira. Only this fantasy kingdom is filled with lesbian chicks. You like Captain America World War II? Well, we got the prequel of World War I, and Wonder Woman doesn't need no Bucky or Howling Commandos. She'll literally walk in the middle of a battlefield, bullets be damned. Thought Asgard was pretty cool in Thor? Well, Asgard, because we got Atlantis, and Atlantis has like 10 times the number of spaceships as Asgard, and we got fishmen and fish monsters and crab people and giant sea monsters that eat motherfucking spaceships. Aquaman is the shit. And just for you nerds, we even got an updated version of the original costume. Give us all your money.
And so people did, and now the slate of films seems to be much more focused on self-contained stuff that isn't reliant on a cinematic universe. Even Warner Brothers president Kevin Tsujihara was forced to admit that the DC cinematic universe isn't nearly as connected as he thought it was going to be 5 years ago. They're now focusing on making each character in each movie more of an individual effort to try and do what Marvel does in their origin films or Phase 1 films, but throw a lot more money at them and pump them up on steroids, because so far it's working. Shazam looks like it's going to be a pleasant surprise, and towards the end of the year they have that weird Joker standalone film that is technically not a part of the DCEU, but it goes along with the overall direction that these movies should be more self-contained, which is fine to a degree, but eventually someone is going to get angry that they can't use the same tactics that Marvel does by having less popular characters get bolstered up by having other superheroes guest star in their movies. And now that we know that the DCEU is a universe filled with fish people who pilot giant underwater spaceships, it's now going to be next to impossible to go back to anything grounded and gritty. I think the biggest lesson they should have learned from Aquaman's success, and the ultimate lesson they should have learned from Marvel, is don't be afraid of letting these characters and stories be what they are. A big defining characteristic from the early era of superhero films was an absolute disdain towards the source material. X-Men couldn't dress in their famous Jim Lee era costumes. Oh no, that stuff is stupid baby crap. No, in our adult movie, they need to be in all leather because the Matrix was pretty cool, and that's what an adult big boy movie looks like. And it's this sort of condescending attitude that ultimately leads towards failure.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
The big oh shit moment in Aquaman is where he puts on an updated version of the classic costume. He doesn't need to be Brokewoman anymore. He can actually be what he was always meant to. And if you're ashamed of the movie you're making, then that's something that the audience will instinctively feel as well. If the DCEU wants to stand strong on its own, that's a larger lesson it'll need to learn if Warner Brothers actually wants to build upon the success seen in Aquaman. That they can't be ashamed of these characters and what they are by putting them in a muted color palette while they make snippy remarks about their goofy comic book costume origins. Marvel was able to build their empire, but not by hating themselves and showing contempt for their material. If the DCEU is to do the same, it's a lesson they'll hopefully have finally learned now that they've tasted success in a film that they probably didn't want to make in the first place. So yes, Aquaman did save the DCEU, but this is just the starting line. Where things go from here will be the true test of this is just a flash in the pan or the start of a new golden era. This is going to be my last video for a while as I go and get ready for a month of Ice and Fire. So tune in April as I kick off my Game of Thrones month. And remember, if you want to support the videos you want to see, check out my bounty page at bounty/lobster magnet and vote with your money for the videos that you want to see and get your name featured in the video. So summon your maesters, send out your crows, and put your bounty money where your mouth is, and support this new crowdfunding platform that wants to support me to help make the content that you want to see. Check out my bounty page, link in the description below. And I'll see you next month for a month of Ice and Fire. Thanks for sticking around and hearing me out. And remember, lobsters and tennis, but don't you grab it.